So that's the way. That's how I would define an agent. What is not an agent, right? So you have chatbots, which was the first version of an AI system. Chatbots are just giving you responses to your questions, right? They're relying on pre-training data. They're not using tools. They're not using any data sources to answer questions, right? What makes an agent uniquely an agent is that it has some degree of autonomy to execute on a plan, and it has access to tools, right? I think that's the best way I would try to distinct between what is an agent and what is not an agent. Something is not agentic when it's not using external data sources to produce an action. So that's how I would define.
What if I told you every financial advisor will soon have a team of AI workers, not tools, not chatbots, actual digital coworkers that takes on 70% of their operational workload? No more onboarding bottlenecks, no more data chasing, no more juggling 20 disconnected platforms. And the firms that adopt this first will grow faster than anything we've seen in modern wealth management. I'm Chris Hensley, your host, and this is Money Matters. Today's guest, Jonathan Michael, isn't imagining this future, he's building it. A two-time founder with 10 plus years in EdTech and WealthTech, Jonathan now leads growth at TIFIN. Am I saying that right? TIFIN AXIS?
TIFIN, yes.
TIFIN AXIS, where he's focused on one mission, giving advisors an AI-powered digital workforce that handles the operational heavy lifting so that they can serve more clients more deeply. In this conversation, Jonathan breaks down what an AI worker actually is, why structured prompting is now a compliance requirement, how agents will change advisor onboarding forever, and what the RIA of the future looks like when humans and AI coworkers operate side by side. If you want to understand the biggest shift we're heading towards in wealth management and how to prepare your firm before it hits, this is the episode for you. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Christopher. Thanks for having me on.
Super excited to have you on. So we ran into each other through LinkedIn, right? Of all places. Yeah. I think originally you saw an article by Rob Burgess that was talking about let me say all these letters together. AI SEO.
Right.
And then you made an additional article that was kind of incorporating, it's like, okay, this and kind of built on top of that. And for listeners, there's on my webpage, if you go to moneymatterspodcast.com, I've got a link to that article that you wrote on there. But that was kind of how we got connected, was through LinkedIn and through that conversation. And I had been following your videos because what I really liked about them is that you're showing us practical things. I'm seeing a lot of these like marketing companies that are giving us kind of, I wouldn't say polished ways of coming at AI, but you were giving us really kind of nuts and bolts, like here's something you can do. So I really like that. We talked about having a conversation about agents because, we hear that's a kind of a buzzword going on out there right now. We're hearing a lot of hype around that. When we hear that word agent in its simplest terms, what is an AI agent and what is not an agent?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll try to illustrate it with like a simple example that advisors can resonate with, right? So if you think of like knowledge work today, if you think that advisors are also, I would consider as knowledge workers, right? So, we use a laptop, we have software subscriptions, we have CRM planning, we have a CRM tool that we use, we have financial planning software, we have tax planning software, we have all these different tools. And at the start of a week or at the start of the month, you have a plan, right? You create a plan and then you try to execute on the plan. Hopefully you do have a plan, or you have a to-do list, for example. All of us can resonate with that. We all have to-do lists and we try to check it off to get things done, right? You can illustrate that example with how agents are designed to function. Agents create plans. They have access to tools that could be data sources. It could be web search. It could be CRM data. It could be your Google Drive, right? And then it goes and executes on those tasks. And it uses tools to accomplish that. So that's the simplest way to illustrate what an agent is.
Mm-hmm.
It's some version of a LLM using tools and memory to accomplish tasks, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are essential components that make knowledge workers distinct. That is what we are as humans, right? As human knowledge workers. We have memory, we have short-term memory, long-term memory. We have tools, and we have plans to execute on. So that's the way. That's how I would define an agent. What is not an agent, right? So you have chatbots, which was the first version of an AI system. Chatbots are just giving you responses to your questions, right? They're relying on pre-training data. They're not using tools. They're not using any data sources to answer questions, right? What makes an agent uniquely an agent is that it has some degree of autonomy to execute on a plan, and it has access to tools, right? I think that's the best way I would try to distinct between what is an agent and what is not an agent. Something is not agentic when it's not using external data sources to produce an action. So that's how I would define. Yeah,
I love that.
Makes sense.
I love that. So I'm gonna kind of repeat what you just said, because we're wanting to bring in the layperson here, because we're wanting to try to decode this word agent that we're hearing around. So let's start backwards. You talked about chatbots. So there's a juxtaposition of what we saw roll out at the beginning, where there were these chatbots, but they didn't have some of these additional features. They had preloaded data, but they did not have the ability to create a plan, use tools, or execute on task. And that kind of makes them different there. And then when you talked about the agent, I'd kind of map this out as you were saying that. So the idea of being able to create a plan, having a set of tools, whatever that may be, and then the idea of being able to complete tasks. And then we also talked a little bit, what you talked about was autonomy, and the ability for the agents to act on their own. Maybe at first, not so much. And then as you get more confident in them, giving them more autonomy. I think it's a really good explanation there. Let's talk about some of the practical value here. What's one real advisor workflow today where an agent is clearly better than a human or a traditional software tool?
Man, I have two examples here. Okay, Christopher, and I'm going to be I might be a little bit controversial with my examples.
Okay, right? I love controversial examples. Go for
it. So I'll use an example of something that's core to what an advisor does, right? It's financial planning. And I know there's lots of compliance protocols around this, and I definitely don't, I'm not trying to promote that you do this. So you want to take this with caution. But running Monte Carlo simulations, right? Think about how many probabilities you need to run, how much time it takes to run an actual Monte Carlo simulation. You can now do that in an AI agent that's built for Excel. So if you're an advisor that's still using Excel to build your financial plans, and hopefully you're not, hopefully you're still using, there's tons of financial planning softwares out there, and hopefully you're still using that. But when it comes to building out bespoke financial models, something that's core to even financial analysts, core to even what some advisors have done in the past, and some advisors still do, I believe. I think an AI agent that natively understands all the components and artifacts of Excel that can go ahead and create these models that would otherwise take a lot of time. I think that is becoming increasingly good with every new iteration of a model. The company that I'm referring to is called tryshortcut.ai. I've actually created a video on this on my YouTube channel where you can, see how I'm actually using a system prompt that functions like a CFP would. So it's using the 7-step planning process, and it's creating the plan under constraints. So that's important to remember, right? I'm giving it constraints about all the, different parameters I want it to follow. I'm giving it the standard deviation basis, the percentage points. I'm giving it like very specific information about the client, right? So that's an example of an AI agent for Excel that's getting really, really good at, creating financial plans. The other example, which is, I think a lot of advisors may resonate with more, is Claude, right? So if you look at what a lot of advisors are doing day in and day out is, writing reports, doing research, creating presentations, building out models in Excel maybe, or extracting and analyzing PDFs, form-filling PDFs. Claude is a general purpose agent. Like, this is a chatbot, right? You go to Claude.ai, you can sign up for it. This is a general purpose chatbot. I would say it's agentic. It's not a chatbot anymore. It's a general purpose agent that Claude has designed to do these tasks now. So it can use Excel. It will use an Excel as, an XLS format to actually create these models. It'll use PDFs to analyze data. It'll literally create PowerPoint presentations for you. So I think that is something that's so central to what an advisor does. Like, previously maybe you'll hire a client you might hire a client operations associate or associate advisor to do some of these tasks, but now you can do that within these two tools, right? So I would say those are examples that stick out to me. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, no, the idea of financial planning, the idea of the Monte Carlo simulation, right? So I don't think that's too controversial. Hopefully clients don't think we have that in our head when we're doing the financial planning. We've always had some form of assistance, right? Whether it's financial planning software, or I've been in the industry for 22 years. So yes, I fall in the category of somebody who has used Excel spreadsheets for many years and then stopped, right? Like we've got these tools that are much better. And this is a progression of that. And so some of the things that you're seeing, being able to put like constraints based on CFP guidelines, and it's not a guesswork thing. The AI is really good at putting those into place and adopting those old Excel spreadsheets and working in that direction. And you mentioned Claude. When I was doing my due diligence on LLMs, now we're several years into the future here, but it was who's going to be last man standing, right? So you kind of had to pick a lane. I would try a little Claude, a little bit of ChatGPT, and I got deep into ChatGPT. And I really haven't gone back into Claude, but I'm seeing a lot of the programmers, people who are building out stuff that Claude's almost like preferred. And so from what I'm hearing from you is maybe I need to go back and look at it. I know we had that news this week where like Claude and Google have kind of pulled to the front of the race, right? And then ChatGPT or OpenAI, right? They said, okay, we're going to do code red and go back in and try to compete. So we're still looking to see who's last man standing there. But any additional thoughts on Claude? I'm intrigued. I want to kind of go back into the.
I'm glad you asked, and I really wish more advisors were looking into Claude. ChatGPT is a general purpose consumer chatbot at this point, and it can do some pretty cool tasks. Like it's great, but Claude, the way they think about model development and model progress is really designed around the enterprise, right? So they're thinking about business first use cases. They're designing Claude around business first use cases that is very relevant to what an advisor does, and so that's something that a lot of other foundational model companies like, OpenAI isn't really thinking about. And Claude takes, data protection really seriously. Data retention is a big deal. They don't train, on your data. They have very clear policies around it. It's transparent and easy to understand. They came up with a constitutional AI framework as well, which is basically a regulatory framework for model usage. And so I really like Claude because they are really, I would say they are the model for financial purposes. And more firms ought to be using it for sure.
I love it. Yeah. Okay, I got to take a second look at it for sure. I was like, all right, if I'm going to get better at this, I got to pick a lane and stay in it. And I got data analytics certified and prompt engineering certified like a few years back. And I said, okay, but as advisors, we might be interested in this stuff, but we could spend a lot of times breaking stuff, right? So if you hire somebody like Jonathan to help you with this, I encourage people to learn as much as they possibly can so you can know what, even speak the language for. Know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think one simple way to look at this Claude ChatGPT thing is to observe the way the companies are releasing products. In ChatGPT, you can create images, right? A lot of advisors, it's probably not going to be super valuable for you to create Ghibli images of yourself all day long, right? That's really a waste of compute power. Like, it's a lot of compute that it takes to generate these images. Anthropic has gone the other route. They don't have any kind of native image generation capabilities, right? Instead, they focus on like really hard-coded data analysis. They have Claude Code, which is the best coding agent out there. Those are the features that advisors really want. You want to model. You want to be able to use a general purpose AI agent that's focused on delivering great data analysis, help you build out documents. One quick example. Once you build out a financial plan, for example, let's assume you want to create a personalized investment proposal, right? All right. You can take that data, throw it into Claude. It'll create an investment proposal that's in your firm's brand guidelines. You would otherwise spend maybe 5 hours in Canva doing this yourself. Well, imagine that you can now use Claude to do that. And Claude has a feature called Claude Skills. My newsletter covered that a little bit, and maybe I should make more videos about that. But Claude Skills is really incredible because you can take your brand guidelines, your firm's brand guidelines, feed it into Claude and have it follow the same colors, the same fonts. I mean, that's something that's unbelievable. It's incredibly useful for advisors.
Yeah, that what I've seen, I think I read that article and that probably pointed me to Claude Skills because what I've looked into on it, it looks fascinating. It looks like where you're basically training it to repeat things that you're doing often in Claude. And that's powerful to be able to do something like that. I'm going to pivot a little bit because one of the things that, as I'm going down the rabbit hole here with AI, the idea of data sovereignty is something that memory and data sovereignty are two things that I'm kind of leaning into for my digital Kaizen book that I'm working on. Now, you talked about how data infrastructure, not the model, is the real bottleneck. Why might small sovereign models actually be better for advisors than massive frontier LLMs?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. In fact, NVIDIA research came out, a few months ago talking about how small language models might be more token efficient. And what that means is that it just consumes, fewer tokens, and that means less compute, which means it's a lot faster to run, for one, right? So small language models are useful in the fact that the latency is really low and you can run really fast, run it more effectively. I think small language models, so that's on the speed side of the, as far as model inference is concerned, right? So being able to run these models really fast. But I think like the data protection that you get from that is also useful. I think small language models are really useful for specific tasks versus large language models. Like I don't need to know about what Shakespeare wrote about a poem when I'm trying to run like a very specific client onboarding task that has to be able to retrieve data in a specific format, populate it into a specific software system. That's a very narrow task that I think a small language model would be really good at. So I think that you have a unique ability to train on extremely specific skills or specific use cases versus a general model like, Opus 4.5 or GPT 5.1. So I see the value in a small language model. So I think you're running it locally, data sovereignty, like you said, being able to host all your data, run your data in your own environment. I think the challenge there, though, let me, kind of push back on that, push back on what I just said a little bit. I think the challenge there is in the orchestration piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to be able to orchestrate all your workflows yourself. Let's assume you have a model locally, you have your model running locally, but then your data sits in the cloud, right? You have your CRM, your financial planning, tax planning data, all of that is in the cloud. How do you pull all that data? How do you run it effectively? How do you run evaluations, making sure that the use cases are actually doing the job it's supposed to do? That is where it gets tricky. And I don't know if advisors want to do that. You're better off trusting a company to actually run that for you. Now you can run a small language model locally on your desktop for fun and, yeah, have at it, check it out, you can use your data. You can, probably feel more safer to use client information in a small language model that runs locally inside your environment. But then to run like real business workflows, I think that takes a level of orchestration, bringing data together nicely into one unified interface and being able to run those agentic workflows. So I think that's where you're going to run into some problems.
Understood. That makes a lot of sense here. So even just the introducing the idea, because I don't know if a lot of advisors or people have heard about this, but the idea of small language models instead of the large language models where they're, one of the benefits that you mentioned were speed, that it consumes less tokens, right? It's compute less, right? It works less as far as is spinning up the tokens on their data protection. If it's something like an NAS or a local server, that it's possibly more private, but then again, if you're backing it up on the cloud, who knows, right? And then the idea of noise, right? And stuff. If you're using these smaller models and being able to really give it content. Sometimes I think it's a big thing of less is more, right? Where some jobs that you're trying to have it do, it doesn't, like you use the example of Shakespeare, it doesn't need to know the entire Shakespeare, right? To be able to do one specific task. I'm seeing some of these white papers out there where they're talking about content curation, content training, and really kind of filtering out what you're putting the AI towards. So that part of it is good. But on the other hand, if you're doing some of these larger enterprise level full business things, just the friction of, right, of having to jump from one system that's local to maybe your CRM or something like that. So as we're, rolling through this stuff, we're getting all of these ideas, but let's talk about structured prompting, because this is something that you talk about. You say wealth firms using AI without structured prompts have no verification loop. What does that mean in practical terms, and why is it a compliance risk?
Well, I think you've got to give an answer. You've got to show a reasoning trace of how the AI came to a answer or conclusion. If you're using AI for anything that's client specific or data sensitive, where you're using client data exclusively to like run specific work, maybe it's planning or investment research, whatever it is, you've got to give a clear response, a clear reasoning trace, right? Or an audit trail, one might.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think like structured prompting is really important because it reduces your hallucination risk by many factors. I mean, by 77, 80%, like you can really dramatically drop, the rate of hallucinations with structured prompting, because these models really like structure, right? They're designed to receive structured input, generalize and synthesize information from its training data set, from the web, and then give you a response, right?
Okay.
So when you give clear instructions, the model is like clear about what it needs to do. So an example of structured prompting, for example, is a chain of verification, right? So everyone knows chain of thought prompting.
Right.
Hopefully you've heard of chain of thought prompting and you know what chain of thought prompting is, which is, structuring your prompt through simple steps and making it clear about what the steps are so the model knows what it needs to do. And you're able to test the steps, right? But chain of verification lets the model verify its own output automatically. A simple example is it's really the phrases first, like being able to like know what phrases to throw at the model, right? Let's assume you ask the AI to do something for you, maybe writing investment research or a market commentary or something, right? Market commentary, for example, you need to look at a lot of numbers, a lot of data sources. You're trying to come up with, output that your clients are going to connect with. A simple example is write me a market commentary for today. Make sure you run a chain of verification after you do that, right? It's really a simple phrase, and you'll see the model kind of verify its own output. Another phrase is reflect and refine, right? Models are, there's a lot of work that AI research companies do before a model goes out into production. But one of the, features that they spend a lot of time on is reinforcement learning, right? Teaching a model based on human feedback on how to get better. The thing is, like, you can actually use that feature by, like, you can use a simple phrase like reflect and refine, and you get the model to reflect on its own answers again, and then refine it too. So chain of verification is you're verifying facts and data, right? But with reflect and refine, you're having the model reflect on what it said and then refine it. So the refining piece, right? That refinement piece is where you can really get some extra gains. And one other technique that I personally love a lot is called multi-hop retrieval. I know for a fact, Christopher, I'm not sure about you, but I think advisors are putting more documents and data in AI than we think. A lot of them
nobody's going to fess up to that, but I'm going to say yes. And not just us. I think all industries are moving towards that direction. So it's a problem we're going to have to solve and figure out.
Yeah. I think multi-hop retrieval. So that's the phrase. These are all phrases, right? I don't like techniques, just throwing out techniques for the sake of it. Sounding too technical or whatever, but multi-hop retrieval is really, think of like a use case where you have estate planning documents, tax documents, financial planning documents. You have the advisor, you have the client's risk profile, you have all this information about the client, right? You want the AI to traverse across all of those data sources and come back with a clear synthesis of what you're looking for. Maybe it's able to find insights that you might not otherwise see, right? You run the risk of groundedness, right?
Mhm.
So when you have the AI parse through all this data, right? How do you know the model is grounded, right?
Right.
How do you know the model is grounded on the data? So that's when you run that prompt and you say, run a multi-hop document retrieval and make sure all the data, all your responses are grounded in the documents that I shared with you. And make sure you add source attribution to each data point, to each data point that you've analyzed. So you multi-hop document retrieval, to put it in simple terms, is getting the AI to hop through all these documents, parse each page, make sure that every line it's generated for you is actually grounded in the document, right? These are like simple things that advisors can start implementing and start getting value on, like ASAP. So
I
yeah.
love it. I love it. So you said a whole bunch right there. So I'm going to go back and kind of point out some of the things that stood out to me. One, you just talked about the idea of it being grounded and the idea of going back through the data. I think about indexing, like going through a giant document, but then cutting it up so that you're making sure that that it's seeing it, that it's in those prompts and the way that the LLM is hitting it when it's going back. One of the things we started with, so before we talk about documents, right? We started with compliance. So I kind of put a firewall here because advisors are human beings, right? So there's going to be cases that they're using for their business that we have to answer that compliance question right away. No ifs, ands, or buts, right? But then there's stuff that they're doing in their personal life that they maybe, if you're over on Nana Banana and you're messing around, you don't necessarily have to worry about compliance, right? So, but from an advisor standpoint, being able to prove your work, right? Or I think about when we make an investment recommendation, when we do that, and if we ever get called out, right? If we say, why did you make this recommendation? If you've got data, if you've got investment reports and information backing that up, that's the kind of things that will help solve a compliance issue on it. Same thing with what you talk about with structured prompting and the idea of this verification loop. You're asking it to
Yeah.
prove its work. You're asking it to show a trail that if you do get audited, what was your reasoning in making this recommendation? You have a way to answer that. No ifs, ands, or buts. You've got to show your receipts, right? So I like that. I like that idea there.
That's a prompt too. What you just said is a prompt too.
I didn't even think
Prove to
about
me
that.
that what you that's a prompt.
Yeah.
Prove to me that what you just generated is grounded in SEC regulations.
Yeah. So having your
That's
compliance
it.
marketing angle, just run it through that and just make sure. Now, you did mention the word hallucinations. One of the things that this is helping, right? We're having less and less hallucinations here, but you mentioned that this way of prompting helps drop that rate of hallucination. So you only need one, right? You got everything working. You got one crazy hallucination there, messes you up. So the idea of structuring in such a way that you're dropping the rate of those
Right.
hallucinations is good. We're moving in a good direction there. All right, we've got about 2 minutes left. So we're bumping towards the end here. Let me pick one last question for you. We could talk all day. You can tell I love this stuff. Let's talk
So
about agent deployment. You mentioned that building an agent is the easy part. What are the hard parts when deploying agents inside a financial advisory firm?
well, if you look at what we're doing here at TIFIN AXIS, we're working with firms, aggregators who are, working with advisors in transition, right?
Right.
They're moving across firms and you're trying to pull a lot of data, trying to bring it into another data environment. When you look at data migration for an advisor's tech stack, think about the entire spectrum. You have CRM, portfolio management, portfolio accounting, custodian data, then you have document management. That's a lot of structured and unstructured data. What do you do with all of that? How do you migrate that really well, safely? And how do you run AI workflows on top of that, right? And so what we've done is we've built out this data infrastructure that lets you pull all of these disparate data sources into an ontology. Basically, an ontology is, transforming all these data sources into objects that have relationships with each other, right? You can quickly form relationships between all these different data objects. And that's really important when you're running AI systems, because you want to make sure that all of this data is connected and that you can run AI on top of that. But also it's the physical data isolation, right? So it's not like a logic-based multi-tenant SaaS type, environment where you have your data sitting in the cloud, and your client IDs could get mixed up and whatnot.
Right.
When you're dealing with advisor data, you want to make sure that the data is physically isolated, the PI is anonymized, all of that. You have zero data retention, so that you can run AI, smoothly on top of that without any fear of data commingling and whatnot, right? So the
Sure.
physical data isolation piece, like literally having like physical hardware dedicated to your data sources, I mean, that's a big piece. And some of like that's defense grade architecture that we are trying to deploy within TIFIN AXIS for running our agents.
I love that.
And so in the transition process, as you can imagine, there's a lot of data to bring in and deploy. So we try to take that very seriously. Yeah,
Well,
that's the hard part. That's the hard part.
So if that's the hard part, what's the easy part? So we are right here at the end. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show today. What a good place to leave it at, because I think it gets everybody's cogs moving in the right direction. Jonathan, for advisors who'd like to learn more about your company, but also I know you have the YouTube channel. We'll put a link to the YouTube channel on our YouTube channel so that people can find it. Where can people find you at?
Yeah, so there's multiple places here, like, there's tifin.com/axis, where you can learn about TIFIN AXIS and you can schedule demos to learn more about how we're building AI. But also my personal LinkedIn, I create content every week. I have a YouTube channel called AI for Wealth, and a newsletter called Wealth Management Prompts, where I try to publish best practices for prompt engineering for advisors every week. So you can find me on LinkedIn too.
I love it.
Yeah.
So you've got multiple hats. You've got your main gig and you've got your creator gig, much like me.
Yep.
I love it. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show. We'll have to have you back. It's such a big topic. I feel like we just kind of hit the surface here. So have a good rest of the day there.
Thank you, Christopher.